Hi, welcome to our Gen Talk on Research Design Overview. Your research design is really a recipe, so we're going to talk about your design as a recipe. I'm Jennifer Kalfsbeck-Getz, and I'm going to be discussing research design and the importance of research design with you today. So let's talk about what research design is. Research design really is an overarching strategy. It's a blueprint or a recipe for a proposed research study. It's empirical or scientific. Simply stated, research is the process we embark upon to find answers to find answers to our questions. Empirical research applies a research design model and at least one method of data collection to seek answers to our questions. So it's not a literature review of what's already been studied. It's your own original look at something based on questions that you have about a phenomena or an experience. Sometimes we answer questions in a non-empirical way, and to go throughout life studying everything empirically would be impractical. So in a day-to-day life, we may rely upon authorities, which may be our parents, family members, experts in a field that we know or that we can have access to. We might rely on traditions or customs within a culture or within our own culture. We might rely on personal experience to understand what is going to happen. We might rely on what we consider to be common sense, though I find my notion of common sense is not necessarily as common as I'd like it to be. And we might rely on the media. In designing empirical research, what we do is we do empirical research when we wish to build upon existing knowledge about experiences, phenomena, etc., or answer practical questions about how to do something or why something is important or if something is effective. We like to make informed decisions, and by doing empirical research, we can have a better understanding of what the best approach might be towards working with children with autism or assisting adults with Alzheimer's, etc. We might also do empirical research because we'd like to affect change, hopefully positive change. The empirical or scientific method is designed to include 7 basic steps. You select a topic that you're going to study and probably narrow that topic to something that you can actually really investigate in depth. You write your research questions. Research questions are the questions that guide your research. You generate hypotheses from these, and these determine everything from this point forward. What is it you want to know? Your research questions need to be something that are measurable so that when you collect your data, you can actually gather data and results to answer those questions. Then you design your study, which is that blueprint or recipe. And we're going to get into the details of what go into a full research design. But you don't design the study until you've selected your topic and generated your research questions and hypotheses. This is the research design part. The rest is actually conducting your research. You then collect your data based on your research design that's been informed by your topic and your research questions. You analyze that data to collect to see how it answers your research questions and if it supports your hypotheses. You interpret that data or do data analysis so that you can share with others and write up your results. And then you inform your audience or the public of your results. In terms of designing research, we're focusing on 1, 2, and 3. And when you've designed good research or created a good recipe or blueprint, you can do 4 through 7. Now let's talk about the 5 components of good, effective research design. These are really the what, why, when, where, and how of a research proposal. Remember always, your proposal is a recipe or a blueprint. A well-designed empirical research study can be completed by anyone. So imagine if you have really invested a lot of time and effort into a topic that's very meaningful to you, and you've gotten approval from your employer or from a local university or healthcare facility. You've even gone so far as to ask for grants and be awarded some funds to do your research. And all of a sudden, at the same time, you also get lucky, hit the lottery, and realize you and your family can move to Tahiti, never to be heard from again. But your research has been funded, it's important, and it's worth doing. So you need to make sure that whatever you've designed, anyone can pick up midway or start for you if you take off to Tahiti before anything gets started. So it's your recipe that does not require anyone to rely on authorities or make assumptions or common sense. So your research design components include goals, and you can have one goal or you could have all three goals. There will be one cycle or another that your research will follow. I'll help you understand what those are in a few minutes. There are models that you apply to your research that you select in your design. There are methodological or methods approaches. There are 3 approaches, and you decide which makes sense in the context of your research study. Again, based on your research questions, which came out of your topic. And then there are 9 method types. That's where we'll spend a lot of our discussion today. Oftentimes when people think about doing research, they immediately they'll go to, oh, what are my methodological types I'm going to use? We really need to save that until we've determined our topic, determined our research questions and hypotheses, and we've set our goals, and then assess the cycle, models, and approaches. Then we can figure out our methodological types. So let's first talk about those goals. Why are we doing the research? Why will you embark upon a process to find answers to your questions? Are you exploring something? Maybe it's something new or novel or that hasn't been looked at all or in the way that you want to look at it. If so, it's exploratory research. Maybe you want to describe something that's occurring or to affect something and describe how that creates change. Then it's descriptive research. So descriptive research describes an occurrence or phenomena, provides understanding about a matter, or it compares and contrasts paradigms. It doesn't explain why, and it's not exploring something brand new. It's describing something that's occurring. Explanatory research is when you want to explain or answer a why question. Why is something having an impact on something else? If you're doing descriptive research, you might note that whenever you increase A, you also note a change in B, but you're not explaining why, you're just saying that it's happening. With explanatory research, you would study why a change in A leads to a change in B, not just describe the fact that that change exists. You can do research that includes exploratory and descriptive, or descriptive and explanatory, any one of them, and sometimes all 3. A research study can be designed to investigate one or more of these goals. Now let's talk about the 2 cycles. You're going to choose one or the other, and it will come from what it is that you've decided to study and those research questions and hypotheses. This is really how we attack our research study, and understanding the cycles is usually the toughest part for people who are trying to wrap their head around designing empirical research. So, first of all, do we use existing theories to generate research questions and hypotheses? Are there theories or explanations as to why things occur in the world, and we want to apply those theories to something new that we find interesting? Or do we intend to generate brand new theory through the process of our research? When we're using the deductive cycle, we're first grounding our research design in existing theories, maybe one theory, maybe multiple theories, and creating new research questions and hypotheses to be tested based on these existing theories and past research. This is usually what most of us do when we're doing empirical research. With the inductive cycle, though, we're making empirical observations before we generate theory, and then test those new theories by generating research questions and hypotheses to be tested based on these newly generated and generating theories. So with inductive research, this is what we're doing when it's very exploratory and no one has studied the phenomenon that we're looking at all. So there's no theory to rely on, and we've sort of got to ground ourselves in theory before we can really get to the nitty-gritty or details. So we've got to start to generate theory. So we gather some data, analyze it a bit, propose some tentative theories, then test them and go through that cycle. Most studies are deductive. So let's compare these with something that's a little bit more graphic to hopefully help you understand the difference and understand the process overall of research design and implementation. So first, with deductive theories, we start at the top with exploring the theories that exist out there. What have others written about that explain why something occurs? After that, we generate research questions and hypotheses based on our original research that we're interested in. How do these theories apply to our topic? What are our research questions that we'd like to explore? And what are our hypotheses? Then we gather data. We analyze that data. And based on that, we propose generalizations and inform those existing theories. So we show them, is that theory supported when applied to this different population? And what kind of generalizations can we make now that we've tested this theory with our own research questions about the population that we studied beyond those that we studied? With the deductive cycle, deductive designs are grounded in theories that exist, but seek to build upon them by adding to them, challenging them, modifying them, or applying new constructs or theories created for other areas of interest that they have not yet been used to test. Okay, now let's look at the inductive side. Same sort of graphic, but with a little bit more detail. With inductive cycles, we have to gather some data first and analyze it so that we can propose a rough tentative theory or theories. Then we generate our research questions and hypotheses. Then we gather data like we did in deductive, analyze that data, and propose some generalizations that inform our new theory. But with inductive research, we're going to have to go through this cycle quite a few times before we generate a theory that's grounded in something that's been replicated. And so in inductive research, you're probably following that cycle 4 to 10 or maybe even 20 times until you find that there's some consistent things that are remaining that help you explain why or develop your theory. Once you have a solid theory that you've developed, then you can apply that deductive method, or someone else can apply that deductive method by using that theory and testing that theory on various research questions. Inductive designs, therefore, are used when a phenomenon has not been empirically studied and theories, therefore, have not yet been generated. The aim is to generate theory, a well-grounded answer to a why question. When the new theory is established through repeating the inductive cycle until common elements emerge as being consistent, future research in the area can apply the deductive cycle to advance an understanding of this newly generated theory. Okay, now let's talk about the 3 models that we apply in our research design. Who will we study and in what time frame? Is it cross-sectional research? This is pretty common. In cross-sectional research, we study several people within a singular frame of time. Patients at a clinic in the fall of 2021, users of screen readers on specific websites in the year of 2019. Maybe it's as simple as everyone who comes to a school or a classroom or an event on a specific given day. That's cross-sectional. You're taking a cross-section of what's going on in a period of time, and that's what you're studying only. You might, though, choose to do longitudinal study, and most pharmaceutical studies, if not all, are longitudinal in nature. In longitudinal studies, we study the exact same participants over a long period of time, usually 2 years or more, and typically longitudinal studies are 5 years to 30 or 40 years. 5 to 25 is not uncommon. In these cases, specific clients of a speech or hearing clinic might be studied from age 2 through age 12. So the same clients, they start working with at age 2 and do specific things that they're trying to understand, ask questions, gather data at age 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, etc., until each of those people hit age 12. This allows us to compare apples to apples, it's always the same kid, and also show trends and commonalities and differences between children. Another example is studying specific users of a specific cochlear implant over the course of, for example, 7 years. So it's the same patient over a period of time and studying several of them so that you have data about the trends over time with those patients. Cross-sectional is the third model that we might apply, and it takes some elements from both 1 and 2. With cross-sectional studies, we study several different participants over the course of time. So several different clients of a behavioral therapy practice over the course of 5 years would be one example of a cross-sequential study. Also, maybe we're going to study multiple different kindergarten classrooms of the same teacher over a 12-year span. So we're not comparing apples to apples anymore like we do in longitudinal studies, but we're not just looking at one cross-section in time. We're looking at the same phenomena over time. We just don't have the opportunity to keep the same participants so that we can see how they are affected or not affected over time. Cross-sectional studies, which is the first type that we talked about, are faster and easier, but less generalizable, which means we can't be as sure that what happened within the study can be generalized to a larger population because it took place within one period of time. Longitudinal studies are more reliable, which means they're more generalizable, and they're more valid, which means they're really testing what we set out to test. But they require much more patience and more resources. And of course, with longitudinal studies, we are much more likely to lose our participants over time. Maybe they move away, maybe they decide to no longer seek services, or other reasons may come up to lead them to choose not to participate any longer. As you do your studies, you will have to choose one of the models. Is it cross-sectional, longitudinal, or cross-sequential? Now let's talk about the 3 method approaches. Will it be more compelling to explain your findings with numeric information, like statistics, or narrative descriptions, like the rich descriptions of how someone experienced something, like we do when we do ratings for products online? Or will both be valuable? If you're doing quantitative research, you're measuring things numerically, frequencies, percentages, averages, correlations. Quantitative research is less time-consuming than qualitative research, and it's usually done with explanatory and descriptive research, not so much with exploratory research. Qualitative research is the other type, where we have narrative descriptions, usually lots of words, or sometimes sounds or visuals that are qualitative. They're not things that you can necessarily count. So they're descriptions of observations and narrative responses of your participants. Typically, exploratory research and also descriptive research will use qualitative, though any of the 3 types, exploratory, descriptive, or explanatory, could use quantitative and or qualitative. The third approach, and my favorite approach, is mixed methods, which is both numeric and narrative. Descriptive, explanatory, and exploratory research could use both. You may decide that you want to talk about percentages, averages, and correlations, but also provide some rich descriptions that really bolster those percentages and frequencies and averages. And it really can be the best of both worlds when you use mixed methods if you have that opportunity. These methodological approaches, though, should be selected based on the research questions that you devise and your goals of your study, not based on preference or convenience or fear. Some people might prefer to do quantitative research because it's quicker and they'll be done sooner. Or they may find that it's more convenient to do the quantitative research, or they might just fear statistics and choose qualitative because they're afraid of math. Don't make choices based on that. There are plenty of computer programs that will do the math for you. And if something is worth studying, it's worth taking the time to do it right. Focus on your research questions and your goals, and let your methodological approach or approaches derive from that. Now let's talk about the 9 method types. When people think about research methods and research design, they immediately go here and say, oh, I want to do a survey on, or an experiment about. And that's really a backwards way of approaching research design and methods. Don't let the tail wag the dog. You determine what your topic is. You determine your research questions that you'd like to ask and your hypotheses, and then you determine everything else, including and especially your method types. The first method type that we're going to talk about, which is a specific tool, use to gather data, and all of these are tools used to gather data, is experiments. Experiments are controlled. They wish or seek to find cause and effect relationships between independent and dependent variables. They include a control group and experimental groups, and they always randomly assign participants to the groups. If any of these elements are not included, you're not doing an experiment. Some studies are not appropriate in experiment format. If that's the case and you like experiments or they seem relevant, you might do a quasi-experiment. In this case, they're controlled. You're seeking as close to cause and effect as you can get. You have an independent and dependent variable, maybe more than one independent and dependent variable. And you have a control group and at least one experimental group. But with quasi-experiments, for some reason, you cannot randomly assign people to groups, oftentimes because for various reasons, they've already self-selected into those groups. And so you can't move them around. And quite frequently, it's for ethical reasons. So in those cases, you might be able to do quasi-experiments. Some folks like to do secondary analysis. With secondary analysis, which is another method type, there are no new participants. You are not meeting anyone new for your study. As a researcher, you analyze existing data, statistics like census reports, other reports that are written, texts, policies, historical documents, cultural artifacts, etc. The data collection element is really a data analysis element. You collect the sources that you need that are secondary analysis sources, and your research questions let you know what you need to draw from those so that you analyze the research. You can also do observations. Observations are conducted without direct interaction with people being observed or the participants or participation in their activities. So maybe you watch a classroom and sit aside so that you don't have any interaction with the teacher and the students. Maybe you're in a park and you're watching family interactions in a particular park for a reason, or you're trying to gauge homeless activity within that park, but you're observing. You're not engaging with or interacting with those participants that you're studying. And then number 5, surveys. This is what most people think of. We can do structured or unstructured surveys, which means there are very specific questions that you have to ask everyone with structured surveys and you can't deviate. Or there are unstructured surveys in which the protocol allows you to make adjustments, add new questions, delete questions if they've already answered them, or otherwise take that survey in another direction. But that has to be outlined in the protocol of your research because remember, this is a recipe. You can have questionnaire type surveys or you can have interview type surveys. With questionnaires, it's usually paper and pencil or online, and it can have open-ended and closed-ended questions. And with interviews, you're meeting with someone and asking them questions. Some may be closed-ended or quantitative, and some may be open-ended, and you're taking notes on their responses. There are a few more types of research methods. Evaluation or program evaluations. Program evaluations assess processes, systems, communities, policies, programs, etc., with an aim to determine the effectiveness of that system or program and make recommendations for change. So oftentimes people are brought in to do program evaluations of the effectiveness of a program and to assess various elements of it or all elements of it and then provide feedback on what's working, what may not be working as effectively as it could, and make recommendations for change. Then we have case studies, which is our 7th method type. With case studies, they're very in-depth, comprehensive investigations of a person, a social grouping like a classroom, or a single event. Case studies can also include multiple cases. These are called collective case studies. So maybe you're visiting 3 classrooms and answering your research questions, and you're doing that intensively over the course of a school year. Field work. In field work, we immerse ourselves in a culture or society. It's immersive research, including observations of culture and artifacts, participant observations, interviews of key informants. The final product is typically called an ethnography. Anthropologists do field work and might spend years within a culture or society as they're investigating elements of that culture. They still go into it with research questions and hypotheses, and they're going to learn a lot that has nothing to do with, or may appear to have nothing to do with, their research. But they're participating and they are observing with the people, really becoming a member of that culture. It's sort of the opposite of an experiment where they have no control and don't want to have control. They want to understand something in the context of its real life experience. And the reason that they stay there for a very long time and become participant observers is so that over time the people in that culture do ease back from feeling like they're being observed and just behave as they normally would. The ninth method type is action research. In action research, the researcher is also the practitioner, asking the research questions and seeking to apply what they learn through their research. So it may be a teacher, it may be a speech-language pathologist, it may be a behavioral therapist, it may be a physical therapist. That practitioner wants to make some adjustments, usually improvements, in their practice, in their methods, in their teaching. So it can include them observing, doing surveys within if there are other participants in the classroom that they're trying to understand, or patients, and evaluations within that one case in an effort to understand and oftentimes affect change. But it could be just someone's work with one student with autism or one patient with traumatic brain injury to see how they're responding to different treatments, and then taking that information, using it to inform their practice, changing their practice, then collecting data to see how that change affects them, analyzing it, feeding that back into that loop to change their practice, and so on. So with a case study, you're not necessarily trying to evaluate and create change. What action research does is sort of combines evaluations and case studies together. And then the 10th type really isn't a singular type, but it's important to mention because it's the inclusion of two or more types, and we call it the triangulation of methods. The triangulation of methods, though, may or may not lead to a mixed methods approach. Imagine that you choose two of these method types to only get quantitative data. You wouldn't have mixed methods then because remember, with mixed methods approaches, they're quantitative and qualitative. Or maybe you decide to do a case study and also field work as part of your design. And both of those are exclusively qualitative in the way that you've set them up. Then you've created a triangulation of methods, two different method types that are qualitative in nature, so it's not mixed methods. Having said all of that, usually when we do a triangulation of methods, we're selecting maybe surveys that are quantitative as well as evaluations and field work. For example, there we're going to have quantitative and qualitative research, and obviously then our triangulation of methods has also led us to a mixed methods research approach. Methods are not, though, what make your research meaningful. Methodological types should be selected after the research purpose, research questions, and hypotheses have been determined. Now let's talk about research design and the proposal that you would write if you're designing research. In every proposal, state what your goals, the cycle, the model, your approaches, and the methodological types that you will apply are. It's absolutely essential, repeatedly and early on. Your purpose statement or statement of purpose is included. It must include your goal. My goal in this research is to explore, or the aim of this study is to describe and explain, and so on. It oftentimes is the first sentence of your research proposal and repeated in different ways throughout the proposal so that it's clear if it's exploratory, descriptive, or explanatory. It says a lot to know what that goal is. That sets the stage for everything else. Your statement of purpose is restated in your abstract, in the introductory or introduction chapter, and in your methods chapter of your proposal. All research proposals do this. In your abstract, you briefly state your goal and consider, if you want to, stating the cycle or the model you chose, maybe the approaches and the types you chose if they're significant to your research, if they're really meaningful and would draw attention. If not, you can just stick to your goal. A quick synopsis of your recipe is what you're doing with the abstract. People will decide if they want to consider your research or the food, if this is clear and intriguing. In your introduction chapter, or chapter 1, you state all 5 components and briefly explain why you selected them. Your introduction chapter, or chapter 1, is the ingredients and nutritional value of your recipe. It's clear what your ingredients are, but it cannot be made or fully assessed without more information. That's what the introduction is. In your methods chapter, which is chapter 3, here you restate those 5 components again that you've selected, explain why they were selected, and explain how, step by step, they will be applied in detail. This is your recipe. A good recipe can be replicated, tested, and completed by anyone who has the recipe and the ingredients. Leave nothing to the imagination or assumptions. Don't leave it for someone to find an expert or the media or common sense. All measurements, strategies, and details must be described in your proposal in that methods chapter.